All right. Okay, so I'm happy to welcome Bryan Bowen of Caddis Collaborative. He's the principal architect there. I'm Alexandria Levitt, and I'm on the board of SAGE Senior Co-Housing Advocates. And we're going to have a little conversation about Bryan and co-housing and his work in that area and the future and all those good things. So welcome, Bryan. And I wonder, just to start, if you want to talk a little bit about your firm and maybe what you're up to right now in terms of co-housing.
Cool. Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Alexandria. I think also my compliments on your book. It looks great. Really appreciate you getting that out. Caddis has been, I started this firm in, I guess, 2002. So we've been around for a little while now, and started working in co-housing around 2000 when I was working for J. Logan Architects, and Jim Leach of Wonderland Hill Development Company hired us to do Wild Sage, and then later we did Silver Sage in collaboration with Chuck Durrett. And since then we've done a bunch of other co-housing communities, and right now we're working on communities in Nova Scotia, Houston, Tulsa, Flagstaff, Truckee, and a little bit on Bozeman with Eric and Mathilde up there, who are wonderful to work with. I think I'm forgetting at least one. Rooted Northwest, which is one we just started working on outside of Seattle in Arlington.
Wow.
So we're really enjoying a fair amount of co-housing work right now. The office currently has nine folks working in it, and everyone's real experienced architects. And we also do a lot of affordable housing. We work for Habitat, we work for local housing authorities around the West. We do a lot of single family homes, net zero homes, passive house homes, and restaurants and coffee shops and things like that too. So, as well as commercial real estate development, new buildings that are ground up. So we have our feet in a lot of different currents, which is really great. We learn a lot from each of those, and that cross-pollinates our ideas and thinking to other project types too. And it also makes us not super reliant on one thing working out. So it's really good. It's a great life. We're really happy.
That's great. Wow, it's exciting. So for people watching this, how would you describe the role of the architect in working with a co-housing group? How have you, a co-housing community, do you find that generally the community has coalesced and then you're brought in, and how does that go?
It's a really interesting question. Every group has got its own arc and its own personality, and its own inherent skill set. I would say the most sort of prototypical path is that once a community has land tied up or is coalesced enough to be seriously looking for land, sometimes we help out with the land search. Other times we get a phone call after they've made an offer that's been accepted and before closing, and they're ready to get going. That's usually when the money starts to burn on the holding costs and they want to move quickly. We've also done a lot of consulting with groups who are just really starting off, and they just really want to have a co-housing buddy to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a group down in Denver right now that we just talk to once a month and check in and see how they're doing.
Nice.
And that can work really well too. The capacity of the group is an interesting question as well, because some groups have internal to their membership more expertise than others. So one group we're working with right now is really very skilled, and so we're shifting the style of the workshop process and the scope of work that we're doing to reflect that. Other groups are a little bit more plug and play from that perspective. And also different sites are really more or less challenging. Sometimes the site just really opens itself up and says, here's what we should be doing. And other times there's a lot more thorny questions, typically on the more urban side of things, to figure out. Suburban site that's down at 4 or 6 dwelling units per acre is usually a little easier than something that's up at the 20 to 30 or 40 DU per acre.
Yeah. Being in Los Angeles, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
what, well, you mentioned the different skill set and different groups.
Mhm.
Uh, what are some of the challenges? Because I know there are for working with the co-housing community as an architect.
I Yes, I think there are. I think there's the roadside is littered with architects who have done one project and are like never coming back.
Right.
And I understand that. In terms of the kinds of projects that we do, they have a different set of challenges, and there's also different things that motivate one to do this work. So I care deeply, and the people in my office care deeply. Several of them have lived in co-housing. One of them was a founder in Wild Sage. Um, we really care about affecting people's lives positively and being a part of that sort of like midwife birthing moment where you see a community really come into its own. Um, and then you go back later and there's this amazing gem of a place of human habitation that's different from what you can accomplish in any other way. So I think the rewards are really clear. I'm also living the life too. So I feel like I have a very tangible connection to the benefits of it. And I also feel like when I talk to new architects, one of the things that we're trying really hard to do is like not set ourselves up as like the best choice or the only choice or anything like that. I believe very strongly that, Laura's fantastic and Grace is fantastic and, you can't go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. And there should be 10 more of us or 20 more of us. So how do we spread the word amongst architects that this is a reasonable thing to do with your time? So when I'm working with local architects, like in Nova Scotia or Tulsa or Houston right now, I'm teaching them how to do the process. I'm teaching them sort of like how to manage the community so it is a reasonable thing. And from my perspective, when we're going through a typical workshop process with the community, it actually can be very streamlined. We consolidate a lot of contact to those weekends. We get a lot of answers really quickly, and we can actually run the process that's very efficient. So
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective, as compared to like working with a nonprofit or a school or a church, you can actually have a lot simpler of a client interface with co-housing if they're doing a good job of decision making, if they're clear, if they have a good idea of what's in the box, like what is it that they're doing and why are they doing it. So if they get their values and criteria sorted out before we're on board, or before we start the design process, we usually try to make them do that before we start the design process, even if it's after we get on board. It's makes it a lot easier.
Well, I think you just hit those last few points you hit, I think you're exactly right. I mean, a co-housing group needs to have that together before they begin to work with the architect or any other professional. And
Mm-hmm.
but also it sounds like, because you live in co-housing and because you've been through the process many times, you understand how this works and you can maybe talk through it. But I think sometimes a common complaint I'll hear is people will come to this process and think, oh, I'm going to get to design my home, and it's different than that, right? It's just community working together. You're making sacrifices so that you keep costs down and other things, but because you have that familiarity, I think it seems like you can sort of ease through those transitions a lot better and bring everyone on board, and as you
Yeah, I
say.
think so. Some of the trickiest members are ones who've previously designed their own homes with architects, and so they're thinking, "Oh, it's going to be like that again." And it's a different kind of process. You're really focusing on collective values and collective vision, and less about what it is that I am exactly going to get for myself.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, and that seems like, I mean, I think you also, one of my questions was, what do you wish people knew before they began to work with an architect? But I think you kind of already answered that. Usually if they've got their land, they have their decision making, they sort of have their values lined up. And so, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, when a group is ready to go, it seems like you can tick through things pretty quickly. So
Yeah,
do you have that kind of process similar to some others where you have like a number of sort of weekend kind of workshops where you plan a project with them, or how does that work for you guys?
it has been a really interesting process, and some of this, video is going to be tied to the times, right? It's
Yeah.
August of 2020, and COVID is happening, and it's all sort of problematic.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys just heard the air conditioning kick on nearby. It's an example of why you don't use air conditioning like that in a common space, because it defeats people's ability to have a conversation.
Oh yeah, I hear
Um,
ya.
yeah. Um, the um, the workshop process, I feel like we had it extremely dialed in pre-COVID. Um, but the entire process was based on the idea that you're flying an expert to town, and while they're there, you're going to milk them for all they're worth and get as much done as you can and really push hard. If you're not traveling to a project, that presumption kind of goes away. So what we've been doing is we've been repositioning all of our community's workshops now that they're on Zoom or some virtual system, to be actually a little bit more easy paced and a little bit more rational in terms of how you chunk down information. Also, people can't tolerate 2.5 days of 8 hours. It's
Right.
not going to happen. So it's been really nice to sort of take a step back from what I think all the architects who are working in co-housing right now have done, is this sort of weekend workshop approach. What do you do if you're not flying somebody there? And how do you manage that information? How do you reflect the collective decision-making process in a rational design process so that you're not overwhelming the community? You're not getting them on a Zoom call and saying like, okay, we just gave you this information, quick, make a decision, tell us what you need. We're rolling out information in a whole different way now. And so that's really super positive, actually. And it's something that had been bothering me for the past few years, right? Why do I have to fly all over the place to do these workshops? It's expensive for the groups. Carbon emissions are no good. Maybe we'll just only work locally. Maybe we'll just do things remotely. And now we're working all over the place. And it's actually made it possible for us to do more projects at once, honestly.
Yeah.
Before I would only take on a very small number of co-housing projects, but now we can handle a few more at a time.
Interesting. So you're sort of coming up with new systems, and we're the best of it. And I think the same way we've had innovations in telehealth, some of these can be positive. There's, I think, nothing like person-person contact, but yeah, sometimes we spend so much time traveling that we don't always need to do that. So that's exciting.
Yeah. I think maybe in the future there'll be a site visit in the beginning and then a design closure workshop in the end, and the middle part will be remote, something like that.
Yeah, that would be super. So well, we're talking about kind of this weird transitional time. We don't know where it's headed and when it's going to end. And also it's this funny thing with like people who live in co-housing, right, can't use their common houses now in the way they were designed to, but presuming that's not, or maybe that is your thinking in certain design issues. What do you see in the future for co-housing, or is it evolving for you in your projects?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think a couple different levels. One is the personal level. My community, Wild Sage, and I've seen Silver Sage do the same thing, and other communities I've talked to are benefiting. The people are benefiting tremendously from being in co-housing during COVID. The ability to, while you're not making community dinners or sharing cooking or cleaning or eating together in that sort of way, which is conventionally the glue, you can still go out in the common green and have a socially distanced, masked happy hour. Wild Sage, as soon as we realized that COVID was something we needed to grapple with and think about early March, we started 3 times a day doing Zoom calls. So there's 3 times a day, people who were feeling isolation or wanted to connect could hop on a Zoom call for coffee, lunch, or happy hour.
Wow.
People who had suppressed immune systems got extra care, and we set up systems so that people could come take their trash away, get them groceries, all that kind of stuff. Sit outside for social time on their porch while they're inside. All those kinds of things. We set up spreadsheets that allowed us to find out what people needed and then who could offer that. We set up like weekly town halls to talk about like, okay, steering team and community, like, are the rules that we're following this week the right rules, and what did the governor say this week, and what did the World Health Organization say this week? So I've seen a fantastic amount of care and a lot of pleasure come out of the process, and a lot of like ability to help each other process the strong emotional times that we're in. So that's the personal community side for me. The market side, right? Like is people are experiencing this outside of co-housing all over the place, and it is even more isolating and even more painful and even more devastating for children, for seniors, for parents who are trying to grapple with, like, you know, maybe being in the sandwich generation. You got parents and kids, and you're stuck in the middle. So the people who we're working with around the country, who are contemplating co-housing, I mean, they've already kind of come to a certain level, right? They're contemplating co-housing. They're doing that for a set of reasons. They're all doubling down. They're all saying, like, oh my gosh, like, I really, really want it now. I'm really going to roll up my sleeves. I'm really going to make it happen. And then the stories that we're telling about living in co-housing and what it can do for you in this environment are more compelling. They have better traction now. So I think it's I wouldn't say it's a time for like a huge boom necessarily, but I do think that the reasons to do it have become even more clear to even more people.
That's nice. That's really nice. Yeah, it's funny. It does seem like it's counterintuitive that the projects that are, like, people are having to put their money in now, that they would be going into it. But yeah, I think people are seeing a need for the sooner the better, right? To get something like this going for them.
Yep.
So, well, it's funny, you've talked a lot about how the pandemic has affected your work and your life in co-housing already. Do you think, like, there was recently an article in LA Times talking about, different architects, asking them about how the pandemic was affecting their work, because if they're doing homes or offices or apartment buildings, now people are thinking about maybe they need more outdoor space, or, are there other accommodations they need to make? And I know your projects differ. Some are urban, some are more rural, but are you having to make adjustments in the design area at all, or are you hoping this passes us by?
Some of the, yes, I think we are making some adaptations, but I wouldn't say that they're sweeping. I mean, co-housing already has a real focus on the design of intentional, well-used outdoor space. So that might have a little bit of different flavor, but it's still very much true. Common house design programs have shifted some. They were already shifting more towards having co-working spaces and, some things like that. That's, I think, gotten to be a bigger need. Parents who are going to be home with kids, they can tolerate a small unit as long as everybody's going away to work. And then, once everybody's there all day, 24/7, that starts to be less tenable. So having co-working spaces is more important. And kind of a finer grain of spaces in the common house. So places where you could perch for a lot of different reasons, whether it's just to get out of the house and rest and read, or whether it's where a kid can do homework for a couple hours. That's become really important. And then, I think people who are looking at like a 2-bedroom or a 2-bedroom plus maybe are starting to think more about like, well, I probably need that home office space. So maybe somebody who was like going to go into a 1-bedroom is maybe going to go into a 2-bedroom, or maybe who's a 2-bedroom was maybe going to go into a 2 plus. So there's some shifting in what people are buying. And there's certainly shifting in people's incomes, like what people can afford. Some people have had their income unaffected by the pandemic, and other people have been devastated. So
right.
That's a very real thing.
Yeah. And uncertainty as well, right, for so many people. That's really interesting. Yeah, with the unit size, also because I know, especially like in an urban project, everyone acquiesces, well, yeah, I'm going to have a smaller unit, I'm going to really downsize, because the point is I'm going to have all these other spaces I can use. And in senior co-housing, we've seen a real reluctance to use any of those spaces in any way, because not wanting to have any risk of infection. So someone who downsized to a much smaller place, now they're really kind of stuck. And in fact, I know some urban places have said there can be no outside visitors, children can't visit, no one can visit. And so it gets challenging. Then you're sharing that space and governing it democratically. So yeah, more challenges in design.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say, I mean, it's another slightly broader piece to that is the neighborhood context that the communities are in. If they're isolated communities or if they're in suburban neighborhoods with no resources or food deserts, like it's kind of different. Like a place like Wild Sage or Silver Sage, where you're embedded in a mixed use, walkable new urban neighborhood, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of adaptation. So like the coffee shop changed, but it's still a coffee shop. It's
Oh, you froze for a minute. Let's see. You froze. Are you there?
was just right over them. Yeah.
Let me see. I think.
Am
Are
I
you
still
coming back?
frozen?
I lost you for a minute.
Okay.
Okay,
I
now
can't
you're
tell
back.
for sure.
Now you're back.
Okay,
Now
cool.
you're back.
Okay, good. Sorry.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
who knows the gremlins of the whole
Yeah,
thing. I was just
they're
saying
out
that like
there.
the software company right over my phone over here they started working remotely so that no one was in that office, so they turned it into a co-working space, but like
Oh,
a COVID friendly one where there's like fresh air, the garage door is open, you have a certain number of people at the time, so it gave people a place to just move straight out of their house into a
that's so smart.
easy environment. So the
That's really
context of the
smart.
communities is pretty important.
Yeah. Well, Bryan, I could talk to you all day, but I'm just going to give you one more
Likewise.
question, and then I'm going to bother you later on other things. But
cool.
So what do you think, co-housing communities considering hiring an architect, and you very kindly, mentioned other architects working this field as well. What are the few top things they should consider when making their choice, do you think?
I think that amongst the folks who have experience with doing other co-housing projects, there's a lot of expertise. And so it's more about whether your group feels a good, sort of vibe with that person. When you put out an RFP, Katie McCann has a great process. If you use the RFP process she's got, it's really comfortable and familiar and to the point. Groups who make up their own, often they end up with a lot of weird questions in there. And they're trying to figure this out, right? They're trying to sort of like intellectually dial it in. And sometimes it's sort of like, well, any of those 3 or 4 choices is a good choice. Like you just pick one and it's okay.
Yeah.
I think, working with somebody who's, if you have somebody nearby, working with someone nearby is great. But in the era of Zoom, it's kind of less important.
Yeah.
Willingness to partner and teach with someone local if they are far away, I think is a good thing. Flexibility on process these days is pretty important.
Yeah.
I think there are other people who've been converting some of their workshops online, but we've, Katie's telling me sort of like pioneers on the doing Zoom workshop process. And we've learned a lot. It's not always that easy.
Yeah.
You can't get up and hug each other at the end. And everyone's excited about the outcome. It's sort of like, okay, bye. I think I think availability is also a question. Like, do they have the production capacity inside the office to, really do the project?
Yeah.
I mean, fee is relevant, but I don't think anybody's probably going to be characteristically high or characteristically low.
Yeah.
So I don't look at it as like, well, that firm's always expensive and this firm's always cheap. I think it's very circumstantial.
Well, it's exciting because it seems like now there are, and your firm and others, there are really experienced co-housing architects to choose from. So it isn't like where a few years ago, or not even, people would, another architect would come and say, I can do this, but not having any co-housing experience, and then they could really get into problems. Now there's, people like you who really understand it and live it. So that's great.
Yeah. I also think that there are several of us who really now believe that we should be spreading the word and not just trying to get all the projects. So I think some of us are really willing to work with, if a group decides like, I want to work with a local person and I don't, we don't want to have, work with, Caddis or Schemata or Laura or whoever, for full services remotely, maybe we'll come in and just help them out. Maybe we'll help teach them in a different way and offer, architect trainings, you
Yeah.
know, and workshop trainings, and give people templates for how to do things. Like, I think there's a different way of doing it than either we're the architects or we're not the architects.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's great. That's super. Well, thank you, Brian. I really appreciate this. We'll have
yeah,
this
it's
up
fun
on
talking to you.
we're redesigning our site. We'll have this up on our site soon, I hope. And
Cool.
look forward to talking and working with you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunities to do these little talks, because I think, I just think it's useful to be able to share ideas, and it's also really fun to talk to you. So
Yeah. Yeah.
thanks.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks so much. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.